I have spent my entire adult life being invisible to the people who were supposed to love me most. Not the kind of invisible that comes from being shy or forgettable. The deliberate kind. The kind that is manufactured by a family that needs one person to be small so everyone else can feel large. I was the second daughter, the quiet one, the one who went to work instead of going to parties, the one who read financial reports on Friday nights while my younger sister Chloe was being fitted for her third designer dress of the month. My name is Diana Mercer. I am 34 years old. I am a forensic financial analyst at one of the most respected risk assessment firms in the country, and I have spent the last 9 years quietly building a life that my family has absolutely no framework to understand. Tonight, at my parents' Christmas Eve dinner, they are about to get an education. Let me start at the beginning because the beginning is the only way any of this makes sense. I grew up in Naperville, Illinois, in a house that was beautiful on the outside and hollow on the inside. My father, Robert Mercer, was a mid-level commercial real estate broker who had spent 30 years cultivating the appearance of success without ever quite achieving the substance of it. He drove a leased Mercedes, belonged to a golf club he could barely afford, and spoke at dinner parties with the confident authority of a man who had read the headlines but never the footnotes. My mother Judith was the architect of the family's social presentation. She organised charity luncheons, maintained relationships with the right people, and curated our family's public image with the obsessive precision of someone who understood at a cellular level that perception was the only currency that mattered. She had warm brown hair kept at a precise length, a smile that arrived on schedule, and a talent for making you feel, in any given conversation, that you were slightly less than what the occasion required. And then there was Chloe. Chloe was 3 years younger than me, blonde, where I was dark-haired, effortlessly, social, where I was methodical, and blessed with the specific kind of beauty that makes rooms rearrange themselves. She had never held a job for longer than 8 months. She had never filed her own taxes. She had, as far as I could tell, never read a financial document of any kind, which was perhaps why she had married Tyler Brandt. Tyler was 38, good-looking, in the aggressive, slightly too polished way of men who spend significant time in front of mirrors. He wore expensive watches and custom suits, and talked about money the way people talk about a subject they have studied theoretically but never actually practiced. He claimed to be the founder and CEO of a real estate development company called Brandt Capital Group. He talked about his portfolio constantly, the mixed-use development in Phoenix, the luxury condominiums in Nashville, the commercial properties in Austin that were, he always said, just about to close. My parents treated Tyler the way medieval peasants treated visiting nobility. My father deferred to him on every financial topic, nodding along to whatever Tyler said, with the reverential enthusiasm of a man who had found someone to finally validate his own unrealised ambitions. My mother quoted Tyler at her charity lunches. She described him to her friends as visionary. She said it the way people say genius, with the breathless conviction of someone who has no framework to evaluate the claim. I had been evaluating Tyler Brandt for 2 years, quietly, methodically, the way I evaluated everything. The Christmas Eve dinner was my mother's annual production. She had been planning it since October, and the level of preparation she brought to it would have been impressive if it were directed at something other than the performance of wealth she didn't actually have. The dining room had been transformed with fresh garland along the mantel, white taper candles in silver holders, and a centrepiece involving what appeared to be an entire florist's worth of white roses and eucalyptus that probably cost more than my mother's car payment. The table was set for 14, my parents, Chloe and Tyler, my mother's sister, and her husband, 3 cousins, a couple who were apparently friends of Tyler's that nobody had met before. And me. I arrived at 7 exactly on time, which my mother noted with the faint disapproval she reserved for people who failed to arrive fashionably late. Diana. She kissed my cheek at the door, her eyes doing their habitual sweep, registering my coat, my bag, my absence of a +1 before her smile settled back into place. You look tired. Are you sleeping enough? I'm well, thank you, I said. The house looks beautiful. Tyler had the florist flown in from the city, she said, lowering her voice slightly as if sharing classified information. He insisted. He said Christmas is the one time of year you shouldn't compromise on atmosphere. I filed this away and went inside. The living room was already full. My Aunt Patricia was on the sofa with her husband Glenn, who was a retired insurance adjuster and the only person in my family I genuinely liked. My cousins, Marcus 26, who was in his 3rd year of law school, and the twins Sophie and Lily 23, who worked in marketing and talked almost exclusively about social media, were clustered near the drinks cart. 2 people I didn't recognise, a man and a woman in their late 30s, wearing the kind of casual clothing that costs a significant amount of money to look effortless, were standing near the window, and at the centre of the room, occupying the largest armchair, with the relaxed authority of a man who always occupied the largest chair, was Tyler Brandt. He was wearing a burgundy cashmere blazer over a white shirt with the top button undone. His Rolex caught the firelight. He was mid-story, one hand moving expressively, while Chloe sat on the arm of his chair, looking at him the way she always looked at him, with the devoted, slightly glassy adoration of someone who has confused proximity to confidence for proximity to competence. Diana. Tyler stood when he saw me spreading his arms in the theatrical welcome he deployed for everyone. The family analyst. How are the numbers treating you? Very well, I said. How's the Phoenix development? Something moved across his face, so brief most people wouldn't catch it. I caught it because I was looking for it. Incredible, he said smoothly. We're in the final permitting phase. Should break ground in Q2. Q2 of which year? I asked pleasantly. He laughed. This coming year, obviously. It's going to be massive. Diana, let me introduce you to some people. He gestured toward the couple by the window. This is Brad and Wendy Coulter. Brad runs a family office out of Chicago. They're potential co-investors on the Nashville project. I shook hands with Brad and Wendy, who were friendly and warm, and who looked at Tyler with the careful, assessing eyes of people who had not yet decided whether to trust him. I recognised that look. It was the same look I wore in every due diligence meeting. What stage is the Nashville project at? I asked Tyler. Pre-development, he said. We're finalising the capital stack. Who's the equity partner? Another microsecond hesitation. We're in conversations with a couple of institutional players. Nothing I can name publicly yet. Brad Coulter's eyes moved to me, then back to Tyler, very slightly. I smiled and went to find a drink. Dinner was the ritual it always was. My father sat at the head of the table and performed the role of patriarch with the mechanical precision of someone who had been playing the same character for 30 years. He told the story about the commercial property he had almost closed in 2019, the one that would have changed everything for what I estimated was the 47th time. He asked Tyler about the markets with the reverence of a student addressing a professor. My mother orchestrated the table with her invisible hand, refilling glasses before they were empty, redirecting conversations that drifted toward anything uncomfortable, deploying compliments like strategic assets. She praised Chloe's new haircut. She praised Tyler's blazer. She mentioned the florist twice more. I ate my food and listened, which was what I always did at these dinners. I had learned a long time ago that the most useful thing I could do in a room full of people, performing their preferred versions of themselves, was to simply pay attention. Chloe, who had the social awareness of someone who had always been the centre and therefore never needed to read a room, decided part-way through the main course that the table's attention needed redistribution. "Diana," she said in the particular tone she used when she wanted to appear generous while doing the opposite, "how's the job? Still doing the audit thing?" "Forensic financial analysis," I said. "Yes." She tilted her head. "Does that pay well? I always imagine those kinds of technical jobs being very, I don't know, unglamorous, very spreadsheet heavy." "It pays well," I said. "You'd think so," she said. "Since you have absolutely nothing else to spend money on." She smiled at the table. "Diana's married to her work, everyone. She doesn't own a plant or a pet, let alone a—" "Chloe," my father said mildly, which was his version of a warning. "I'm teasing," she said, patting his arm. "Diana knows I'm teasing." She looked at me. "You know I'm teasing, right? I just worry about you. You're 34 and you spend every evening alone in that apartment. At some point, don't you want more? A life outside of balance sheets?" "I have a full life," I said. "Of course you do," she said, in the voice adults use when they're agreeing with children. She reached for her wine glass, her diamond engagement ring, the one Tyler had presented to her at a dinner I hadn't been invited to, catching the candlelight. "I just mean, Tyler and I were talking about this the other day, actually. We think it would be really good for you to get out more, meet people in a different sector. Tyler has so many contacts." "He does," my mother agreed, looking at Tyler with approval. "I could set you up with someone from the development world," Tyler offered, leaning back with the ease of a man doing someone a favour. "Good guys, solid earners. Not at my level, obviously, but respectable. Might do you good to date someone with real ambitions instead of whatever it is you usually date." The table chuckled softly. My father swirled his wine. I set down my fork and looked at Tyler with a steady, neutral expression. "That's very generous," I said. "I'll have to pass. See, this is the thing about Diana." Chloe addressed the table as though I were a case study rather than a person. "She is constitutionally incapable of accepting help, always has been. When we were growing up, she refused to let anyone proofread her essays. She wouldn't join any clubs. She just went her own way, and then acted surprised when she ended up alone." She looked at me with an expression of theatrical sympathy. "It's not a criticism, Di. It's just an observation. You've made choices that have led you here, and that's completely fine." The here she was referring to was apparently my life as a single woman in a good apartment with a demanding career. The here Tyler was currently living in the burgundy blazer, the Rolex the florist flown in from the city, was in my professional assessment, constructed almost entirely on borrowed money and fabricated credentials. But I didn't say that, not yet. I looked at my plate and let the table move on. The real trouble started after dinner, when Tyler decided to make an announcement. We had moved to the living room for dessert, my mother's famous chocolate torte, and a bottle of cognac that Tyler had brought and been visibly pleased about bringing. The fire was going, and the tree lights were on, and it was in the way of Christmas Eves, engineered by women like my mother, genuinely beautiful. Tyler stood up. He did this with the practiced timing of a man who understood the dramaturgy of a room, waited for a natural lull, got to his feet, with the unhurried ease of someone who assumed that when he stood, people would look. They looked. "I want to take a moment," he said, glass raised, "to thank Robert and Judith for another extraordinary evening." He nodded at my parents. My mother pressed her hand to her heart. "And to share some news that I think is going to mean a great deal to this family." Chloe's face lit up. She clearly knew what was coming. "As many of you know, Brant Capital Group has been in development mode for the last 2 years, building the foundation, laying the groundwork, doing the quiet, unglamorous work that most people don't see." He shot me a brief, pointed smile at the word unglamorous. But that phase is officially over. He reached into the breast pocket of his cashmere blazer and withdrew a folded piece of paper. He held it up. Brant Capital Group has just been selected as the lead developer on the Meridian Park project in Nashville. $300 million. Mixed use. Residential, retail, hospitality. Groundbreaking in 6 months. He looked at Brad Coulter. Brad, Wendy, I'll be in touch in the new year about co-investment opportunities. This is going to be generational wealth for everyone in the room who moves quickly. My father let out a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a cheer. My mother actually clapped. Chloe beamed and squeezed Tyler's arm and said, "He's been working toward this for so long." Brad Coulter said, "Congratulations, Tyler," in a tone that was warm and entirely unreadable. Tyler sat back down, refolding the paper and returning it to his pocket. I watched him do it. I had been watching him all evening with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who does this professionally. And the thing about watching people who are lying is that the lie is rarely in the big moments. It's in the small ones, the microsecond hesitation, the way the eyes move when a question lands unexpectedly, the specific manner in which a piece of paper is refolded carefully quickly and returned to a pocket before anyone can ask to examine it. I picked up my cognac and took a slow sip. "Tyler," I said, keeping my voice light and conversational, "congratulations on the Meridian Park selection. That's significant. Who's the development authority issuing the contract?" He looked at me. "Metro Nashville's Office of Development and Planning. And Brant Capital Group was selected through the standard RFP process." "Standard and competitive," he said. "We submitted the strongest proposal." "Wonderful. What's the project bond structure? Are you going with a TIF or a standard municipal bond instrument?" Tyler blinked. "Just once, but I saw it. We're in the financing structure phase. The details aren't finalised." "Of course," I said agreeably. "But for a $300 million municipal contract, the financing structure would typically be established before the award. It's a standard due diligence requirement for the issuing authority." I smiled. "Just curious. I work in this space." The room had gone slightly quiet. My mother was looking at me with the expression she used when she wanted me to stop. Tyler smiled back, and the smile was very good, practiced, and warm and patient. The smile of a man who was used to diffusing technical questions with personal charm. "Diana, it's Christmas Eve. Let's not turn this into a deposition." The table laughed and the moment passed, but Brad Coulter, I noticed, had taken out his phone and was looking at the screen with the quiet attention of someone conducting a search. Later, while my mother was in the kitchen and the men had drifted toward the fireplace with their cognac, and the cousins were loudly debating something on Sophie's phone, Chloe found me in the hallway by the coat closet. She had the look she always got when she wanted to have a serious conversation, chin slightly up, arms crossed, the practiced posture of someone who had rehearsed what they were about to say. "Did you have to do that?" she asked. "Do what?" "The interrogation, in front of Brad and Wendy." She shook her head. "Tyler has been working on this project for over a year. This announcement is a huge deal for him, for us, and you sat there and made him look like a fraud in front of potential investors." "I asked him 2 technical questions about project financing," I said. "You know exactly what you were doing," she said. "You've been doing it all evening. Every time Tyler says something, you ask these little pointed questions designed to make him look stupid. And you do it in this perfectly calm, perfectly pleasant voice, so no one can accuse you of being difficult." She looked at me with an expression that was part frustration, part something older and more complicated. "You have always done this, Diana. You cannot stand that someone else is successful. You cannot stand that Tyler has built something real while you sit in an office crunching numbers for other people's companies." "Chloe," I said carefully, How much do you know about Brandt Capital Group's financials? She stared at me. What kind of a question is that? A genuine one. Tyler handles the business. I handle other things. Have you ever seen audited financial statements, a balance sheet, a list of completed projects with verifiable sale records? Oh my God! She let out a short, incredulous laugh. You are unbelievable. It's Christmas Eve and you are standing in my parents' hallway interrogating me about my husband's finances like I'm a witness in one of your little corporate investigations. I'm asking because I care about you, I said. You're asking because you can't stand that I have the life you don't, she said. Her voice had gone flat and precise, the way it did when she was genuinely angry rather than performing it. Tyler loves me. We have a beautiful home. We travel. We are building something extraordinary together. While you, she gestured at me, you are 34 years old and you are alone, and the only thing you have is your job and your judgment, and both of them make you insufferable. She walked back toward the living room. I stayed in the hallway for a moment alone with the garland and the low sound of the fire and the distant murmur of my family continuing without me. I thought about what I knew, what I had spent the last 6 weeks methodically documenting, what was sitting in a secure folder on my encrypted laptop in the apartment my sister had just described as the sum total of my inadequate life. I thought about Brad Coulter's phone. Then I took a steady breath, put on my coat, and went back into the room. The evening ended with gifts around the tree, the ritual my mother had maintained since we were children. She called it the most important part of Christmas, which I had come to understand meant it was the most important part of the performance, the moment when the family was arranged in its most photogenic configuration. The wrapping paper and the firelight and the expressions of delight providing the evidence that everything was fine. Tyler gave Chloe a necklace. It was displayed in a velvet box from a jewellery house whose name I recognised, one of the ones with a waiting list and a 5-digit price point. Chloe held it up to the firelight, and my mother made a sound of genuine awe, and my father shook Tyler's hand with the reverent firmness of a man welcoming a provider into the tribe. I watched and said nothing. On my way out, coat on keys in hand, kissing my mother's cheek at the door, while she reminded me to drive carefully and get more sleep. Tyler caught me in the hallway one more time. He was leaning against the wall with the calculated casualness of a man who had engineered the timing. He spoke quietly in the warm, confidential tone he used when he wanted to appear to be doing someone a favour. "Diana," he said, "I know tonight was a little tense. I know you have questions about my business, and I want you to know that's okay. It's actually healthy that Chloe has a sister who looks out for her." He paused. "But I think we both know that what happened in that living room tonight wasn't really about project financing." I looked at him. "I think it was about the fact that your sister has a husband who loves her and a life that's moving forward, and you're still figuring out what you want." He tilted his head. "And that's hard to watch, especially at Christmas." He said it gently, which was the most sophisticated version of the knife, delivered with warmth, so that you couldn't object without seeming unhinged. "You're very perceptive, Tyler," I said. He smiled. "Drive safe," he said. I walked out into the cold Illinois night and got into my car. I sat for a moment with the heat coming on and the dark street quiet around me, watching the snow fall softly on the Mercer family driveway. Then I took out my phone and opened a secure message thread. The name at the top of the thread was James Whitfield. James was 42 years old. He was the managing director of a risk assessment and forensic finance firm called Whitfield Advisory Group. He had been my professional mentor for 7 years, my business partner for 4, and my husband for 2. Nobody in my family knew he existed. This was not an accident. I had made the decision 2 years ago, after Chloe's wedding. After watching my family spend 3 days worshipping Tyler Brandt's rented tuxedo and fabricated portfolio, and accepting without question every word he said, that I would not introduce James to these people until I had something specific to say. I had something specific to say now. I typed, "It's time. I'll call you when I get home." His response came in 40 seconds. "I've been ready for 3 weeks. Drive safe." I set the phone down and pulled out of the driveway. Behind me, through the lit windows of my parents' house, I could see the silhouettes of my family still gathered around the fire. Tyler's was the largest, the most central, the one everyone else organised themselves around. By New Year's Eve, that would change. Let me tell you what I actually knew about Tyler Brandt. I had begun looking into him professionally 14 months ago, not because I had a specific reason to suspect him, but because I was a forensic financial analyst. And Tyler Brandt was a man who talked constantly about money and had never once in 2 years of family dinners and holiday gatherings and casual conversations said anything that could be independently verified. This is a pattern I recognise. In my professional life, I have dismantled 17 companies, filed evidence in 9 federal cases, and testified as an expert witness in 4 securities fraud trials. The tells are consistent. People who have real financial portfolios talk about specific numbers, specific addresses, specific deal structures. They reference people and companies that exist. They make claims that can be checked. People who are fabricating talk in generalities. They use the language of finance, capital stack equity, partner, TIF instrument, without the precision of people who actually work with these things daily. They make grand announcements and then, when pressed on the technical details, pivot to charm. Tyler pivoted to charm with extraordinary consistency. I began with public records. Brandt Capital Group was registered as an LLC in Delaware, a common jurisdiction, nothing inherently suspicious. The registered agent was a formation service that handled 10,000 LLCs a year. The annual filings were minimal and revealed nothing about assets revenue or active projects. I ran a UCC lien search. Tyler had 11 active liens against various business assets, equipment, receivables, a vehicle. The lenders were a mix of small commercial banks and 2 private lending entities whose beneficial ownership, when traced through a series of holding companies, ultimately connected to individuals with prior securities violations in 2 states. I pulled his professional history from available public sources. He had listed himself as CEO of Brandt Capital Group since 2016, 8 years. In that time, I could verify exactly 1 completed real estate transaction under the company's name, a small commercial property in suburban Indiana that had been purchased for $340,000 and sold 4 years later for $310,000, a loss on the company's only verified deal in 8 years. The Phoenix development he had referenced at every family gathering for 18 months. I couldn't find a permit application, a planning commission filing, or a zoning variance request under Brandt Capital Group, or Tyler Brandt's name in the city of Phoenix's publicly accessible records. The Nashville Meridian Park project he had announced this evening. I had been monitoring the Metro Nashville office of Planning's project database for 6 weeks. Brandt Capital Group did not appear anywhere in their records. There was a Meridian Park mixed-use development on file, but the awarded developer was a Chicago-based firm called Lakeshore Urban Partners. Tyler Brandt had announced at my parents' Christmas Eve dinner in front of a room of people, including a legitimate potential investor, that his company had been awarded a $300 million contract that had actually been awarded to someone else. This was not a misunderstanding or an exaggeration. This was fraud. More specifically, and this was the part that had kept me at my desk for the last 3 weeks, running source documents and cross-referencing financial records. With the focused, slightly obsessive energy I brought to every case, it was part of a pattern. Brad and Wendy Coulter were not the first people Tyler had pitched to. They were not the second or the third. James and I had identified 7 individuals and couples over the past 2 years who had given Tyler Brandt money to invest in Brandt Capital Group projects. The amounts ranged from $40,000 to $280,000. None of the projects had been completed. None of the investors had received the returns they had been promised. Several had stopped receiving any communication from Tyler entirely. 3 of them had hired attorneys. 1 had filed a complaint with the Illinois Securities Department 14 months ago. The complaint was under active review. Tyler Brandt was not a struggling entrepreneur with promising projects in the pipeline. He was operating what appeared to my trained eye, and based on 14 months of documented research to be a Ponzi-adjacent investment fraud scheme, taking new investor money to pay the minimum obligations owed to earlier investors, using the appearance of lifestyle success to recruit the next tier. And he had been doing it while living in a house co-signed by my parents, driving a vehicle that my father had vouched for at a dealership, and wearing the Mercer family's endorsement like a credential. I parked in my building's garage, rode the elevator to the 14th floor, hung my coat in the hall closet, and called my husband. "How was dinner?" James asked. He announced the Nashville project to a room that included legitimate potential investors, I said. "The award that went to Lakeshore Urban Partners." A pause. "In front of Brad Coulter." "In front of Brad Coulter." "Well," James said, and in his voice was the quiet, precise energy he brought to the beginning of every major case. "That accelerates the timeline. I want to move before New Year's," I said, "before he has a chance to pitch Coulter privately and take money from someone else." "Agreed," he said. "I'll make some calls in the morning. There are a few things you should know before we talk strategy." He paused. "I got a call this afternoon from the Illinois Securities Department. The complaint filed 14 months ago. It's been escalated to a joint investigation with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit." I sat down on the couch and absorbed this. "They've been building a case," James said. "They have subpoenaed bank records. They have wire transfer documentation from 4 of the 7 investors we identified. They are 2 to 3 weeks away from an arrest warrant." "Does Tyler know?" "There's no indication he's been tipped. He appears to be operating normally." A pause. "Diana?" "Yes. If you want to be in that room when it happens, if you want your family to understand what has been living in their house, we need to move now, not aggressively, carefully. We need to give your parents and your sister the opportunity to understand what is happening before the federal government shows up at their door, which could make them liable for things they may genuinely not know about." I looked at the lights of the city through my living room window. "How do you want to do this?" I asked. "Your parents' New Year's party," he said. "Your mother mentioned it to you in October. The extended family, the country club crowd, Tyler's potential investors, everyone in one room. You want to come to a family New Year's Eve party? I want," James said very precisely, "to meet your family for the first time in the same room where Tyler Brandt's entire fabricated empire comes down. I think that's appropriate." I almost smiled. "You've been planning this?" "I've been planning this since August," he said. "Go to sleep, Diana. We have a week." The week between Christmas and New Year's was quiet from the surface. My mother called twice once to thank me for coming, in the careful voice she used when she wanted to acknowledge tension without addressing it directly, and once to confirm I was coming to the New Year's Eve party. And could I please bring something, because she was overwhelmed with the catering. Chloe did not call. Tyler sent me a text on December 27th. It said, "Diana, thinking about our conversation. I know we got off on the wrong foot, hoping we can start fresh in the new year." Tyler. I read it 3 times. Then I forwarded it to James and went back to work. What I was working on in those 7 quiet days was the final documentation package. In forensic financial work, the quality of the presentation is as important as the quality of the evidence, perhaps more so because evidence that cannot be clearly communicated to a non-specialist audience is evidence that can be explained away, reframed, or drowned in jargon by a skilled defense attorney. I organised the Tyler Brandt file into 3 sections. The first was the business record, the registration documents, the UCC liens, the single completed transaction, the absence of any verified project completions, the gap between claimed portfolio value and documented asset base. The second was the investor record, the 7 individuals and their documented losses, the pitch materials. Tyler had used the specific promises he had made and the returns he had claimed. I had obtained several of these through the investors' attorneys, 2 of whom had agreed to cooperate once I explained who I was and what I had found. The third was the Nashville announcement, a direct comparison between Tyler's specific claims at Christmas Eve dinner and the public record with the Metro Nashville Planning Database printout, the Lakeshore Urban Partners Award announcement, and a timeline showing that the actual award had been public knowledge for 11 months. James reviewed the package on the morning of December 30th and said, "This is the cleanest case file I've seen in 4 years. If I were prosecuting, I'd lead with Section 3. The announcement is the most recent," I said. "It happened in front of witnesses. It happened in front of Brad Coulter, who called me yesterday." I looked up from my laptop. "Coulter has been in contact with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit for 6 months," James said, his voice carrying the particular satisfaction of a man whose patience has been rewarded. He was placed in proximity to Tyler specifically because the investigators knew Tyler was actively recruiting. "Coulter is a cooperating witness." I sat with this for a moment. "Tyler pitched himself to an FBI cooperating witness at my parents' Christmas Eve dinner," I said. "In front of your entire extended family," James confirmed. "Announced a fraudulent contract award, solicited co-investment, on the record." I thought about Tyler at the head of the room, the cognac and the fire and the folded piece of paper and my father's expression of pure, uncomplicated admiration. "My parents don't know any of this," I said. "No. They have vouched for him. Their names are connected to his. If this comes apart publicly, without any warning, they could—" "That's why we're going to New Year's Eve dinner," James said. "So the first thing your parents understand before anything else happens is that the person in their family who saw this coming, who documented it, who protected them from investing in it, who gave them the information they needed before the federal government showed up, was you." I looked at my husband, at the man I had married quietly 2 years ago in a civil ceremony with 2 witnesses and no family, because I had understood by then that the family I needed was not the one I had been born into. "You're protective of me," I said. "Professionally and otherwise," he said. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready since August," I said, and I meant it. New Year's Eve arrived on a Thursday, cold and clear, the kind of winter night that makes Chicago beautiful rather than brutal. James and I drove the 40 minutes from the city to Naperville in his car, a dark grey sedan that was unremarkable in the way of things that are very good at what they do and don't need to advertise it. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, a watch I recognised as expensive only because I knew him well enough to know what he chose, not because it made any announcement on its own. He was 42, with dark hair, and the kind of steady, precise presence that tended to make rooms quieter when he entered them. He was not flashy. He had no interest in flash. He was the kind of person whose authority was visible only in retrospect. You understood it when you thought back to the conversation, and realised he had known everything, said only what was necessary and let the rest arrange itself. "You haven't told me what you're nervous about," he said as we turned onto my parents' street. "I'm not nervous," I said. He looked at me briefly. "I'm apprehensive," I said. "About my parents, not about Tyler, about what this does to my parents." "Tell me what you mean." "They believe in him," I said. "Genuinely, not because they're stupid, they're not stupid, but because they needed to. Tyler represents everything my father thinks success is supposed to look like. The watch, the vocabulary, the confidence. My father has been performing that version of success his whole life without achieving it. And Tyler walks in and just has it, or appears to. And my father latched onto that. He used it to validate something in himself." I paused. "When this falls apart, it's not just Tyler's credibility that collapses. It's his." James was quiet for a moment. "Do you want to protect your father from that?" "No," I said, and then, "I don't know. I want him to understand that what he chose to trust was a performance, and that what he chose to dismiss me, my career, my judgment was real." I paused. "I don't need him to apologise. I just need him to see it." "He'll see it tonight," James said. We pulled up to the house. The driveway was already full, 8 cars, including Tyler's leased BMW, which I noted had a new set of winter tyres that I estimated at $1,800, and which Brandt Capital Group's most recent expense filing obtained through the investor's attorneys had coded as Site Inspection Vehicle Maintenance. We sat in the car for a moment. "Diana," James said, "whatever happens in there, I want you to know something." "What?" "The work you did on this case. 14 months. The documentation, the source, tracking the investor interviews, the way you organised the file." He looked at me steadily. "You didn't do that for revenge. I know that. You did it because you are very good at your job, and because your job is to find the truth, and you found it. The fact that it also happens to dismantle the narrative that your family has used to diminish you for your entire adult life, that's a consequence, not a motive." I looked at him. "Just wanted to say it out loud," he said, "in case you needed to hear it." I reached out and took his hand, held it for exactly 5 seconds. "Let's go," I said. We got out of the car and walked toward the house, the snow crunching underfoot, the lights of my parents' home warm and bright in the winter dark. Through the window, I could see the party in full effect. My mother moving through the room in her silver dress, my father laughing at something Tyler was saying, Chloe sparkling at the centre of it all. James held the door for me. I walked in. My mother saw me first. Her eyes did the habitual sweep, registering me, registering James, registering the fact of him, and then doing it again more slowly. Her expression passing through surprise, recalibration, and the social manager's instinct to control the narrative of any new development before it controlled itself. "Diana," she came to me with both arms kissing my cheek, and then with the particular grace of a woman who had been managing social situations for 30 years, she stepped back and looked at James with a warm, open smile. "And you must be James Whitfield," he said, extending his hand. "It's wonderful to meet you, Judith." "James," she repeated, processing the name, the suit, the handshake, the quality of presence, all of it in the 3 seconds of the exchange. "How do you and Diana know each other?" "Through work originally," he said, "though that was a while ago." "He's being modest," I said. "He runs the firm." My mother looked from me to James and back to me. I could see her doing the arithmetic of it. The suit, the confidence, the easy way he stood in a room, the specific phrase "he runs the firm," and arriving at a number that surprised her. "How wonderful!" she said, and meant it more than she intended to. "Let me get you both something to drink. Robert." She turned toward my father. "Robert, come and meet Diana's friend." I watched the word friend land in James's expression. He absorbed it without visible reaction. My father appeared from the direction of the living room, Tyler at his shoulder, and for a single, suspended moment, I watched 3 different versions of the same person, my father, my husband, and the man my family had spent 2 years confusing for success, occupy the same space. Tyler saw James, and his face did the thing it always did when it encountered an unknown quantity, a rapid, invisible assessment, the social calculation of a man who was always performing for an audience and always needed to know who the audience was. He saw something in James, some quality of presence that didn't resolve into an easy category, and I watched him decide in real time to approach with the buddy-to-buddy warmth he used for people he wanted to neutralize. "James," Tyler stepped forward with his hand out. "Tyler Brandt, Diana's brother-in-law." "Tyler," James said, shaking his hand with a brief, precise grip that was neither warm nor unfriendly. "I've heard a great deal about your work." Something flickered in Tyler's eyes. "Good things, I hope." "Thorough things," James said pleasantly. And then he turned to my father and began asking about a golf course in Naperville that he had apparently played once, and that my father immediately began describing with enthusiastic authority, and Tyler was left standing with his hand that had just been released, and an expression I recognized from deposition rooms, the expression of someone who has just encountered someone they cannot read. The party filled out over the next hour. The extended family arrived in waves, Aunt Patricia and Uncle Glenn, who greeted me with genuine warmth and shook James's hand with the uncomplicated friendliness of people who had no agenda. The cousins, the country club couples my parents considered their real social currency, Brad and Wendy Coulter, who arrived at 9:15, and who Brad Coulter greeted James with the subtle recognition of 2 people who had spoken by phone but not yet met in person. I watched Tyler, watching Brad and James, speak near the kitchen doorway. I watched his jaw tighten, almost imperceptibly. I watched him try to insert himself into their conversation twice, and be smoothly, naturally redirected both times, Brad asking a follow-up question that pulled James back, James answering in a way that ended the opening. Tyler was smart enough to understand that something was happening. He wasn't yet sure what. Chloe found me near the drinks table at 10 o'clock. She looked beautiful in a deep blue dress, her hair up the necklace Tyler had given her catching the light. She looked at James across the room. He was talking to Uncle Glenn, now both of them apparently enjoying themselves, and then she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decode. "Is that your—" she started. "My husband," I said. "Yes." She stared at me. "You're married?" "For 2 years." "You didn't tell us." Her voice was not angry. It was something more complicated, hurt maybe, and underneath the hurt, something that might have been relief, as if a thing she had been worried about had been resolved, but in a way she hadn't anticipated. "I know," I said. "Why didn't you tell us?" I looked at my sister, at the blue dress and the diamond necklace, and the expression of genuine confusion on her face, because Chloe was not a bad person. She was a person who had never been required to think carefully, who had been given so much, and asked for so little in return, that she had never developed the muscles for complexity. She had loved Tyler because Tyler was beautiful and confident, and made her feel, for the first time in her adult life, like someone whose choices were good. "Because I wanted to wait until I had something important to say," I said. "And now I do." She looked at me for a long moment. "What does that mean?" "It means I need you to listen to me tonight," I said. "Really listen. Not as my sister who thinks I'm jealous or difficult, as someone who matters to me and who I'm trying to protect." Something changed in her face. Not the wall coming down, not yet, but a crack in it. "Tyler," she said quietly. "This is about Tyler." "Yes," I said. She looked across the room to where Tyler was standing with my father and two of the country club couples laughing at something, his watch catching the light. She watched him for a long moment. "I've had questions," she said, very quietly. "I've had questions for a while." "I know," I said. I told myself I was being paranoid. "You weren't." She turned back to me, and what was in her face was something raw and frightened and very young. "How bad is it?" "It's bad," I said, "but you're not involved. Your name isn't on anything. I've checked." Her breath came out slowly. "Stay close to me tonight," I said. "And when things start to happen, and they will, don't panic. Just stay close." She nodded. For the first time in I couldn't remember how long she didn't have anything to perform. She just stood there, small and frightened and real, and I reached out and briefly pressed her hand. "I'm not doing this to hurt you," I said. "I know," she said, and she sounded for the first time like she actually believed it. It began as these things often do with a phone call. We were 20 minutes from midnight. The room was at its warmest glasses, charged for the countdown. The television in the corner, showing the Times Square coverage, the energy of a party that had found its best self in the final hour. Tyler was at the centre of it, as always, telling a story to the country club couples about a development deal in Miami that was apparently proceeding alongside the Nashville project, the scale expanding with each telling. Brad and Wendy Coulter were standing 5 feet away. Brad was listening to Tyler with the careful, neutral expression of a man recording a conversation. James was standing beside me near the fireplace. He was not looking at Tyler. He was looking at me. "He's been watching you all night," I said quietly. "I know," James said. "He knows something is wrong. He doesn't know what." "His instinct is going to be to discredit me," I said. "He's going to say I'm jealous, unstable, that I've fabricated things." "He's going to try," James said. "And then I'm going to introduce myself properly." My phone vibrated. I looked at the screen. The name was Andrew Finch. He was the lead investigator on the Illinois Securities Department case and had been my contact for the past 3 months. Evidence warrant executed today. Arrest warrant issued 30 minutes ago. Agent team en route to subject's Naperville address as backup. We have confirmation of location. Expected execution tonight, per your request for family notification window. You have approximately 40 minutes. I showed the screen to James. He read it. His expression didn't change. 40 minutes, he said. Yes. He looked across the room to where my father was laughing at something Tyler had said, and then to Chloe, who was standing very still near the window, watching her husband with the expression of someone who has stopped being able to pretend. "Then we should start now," he said. I crossed the room to my sister. There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a room when something irreversible is about to happen. It is not the silence of an argument paused or a conversation interrupted. It is something older and more fundamental, the held breath quality of a moment that understands its own weight. I have been present for that silence in conference rooms and courtrooms and corporate board meetings. I have learned to recognize it the way experienced sailors recognize weather, not from the storm itself, but from the particular stillness that precedes it. It settled over my parents' living room at 11:42 on New Year's Eve, and I was the only person in the room who knew it was coming. I crossed to where Chloe was standing near the window. She was holding her champagne glass with both hands, her knuckles pale, watching Tyler with the expression of someone who has been practicing a performance for a very long time and has just quietly stopped. "I need 5 minutes with Mom and Dad," I said quietly, "before anything happens. Will you come?" She looked at me. "Now. Right now." She glanced at Tyler, who was laughing at something, a broad, resonant laugh designed for rooms, and then she set her glass down on the windowsill and nodded. James had already moved. I watched him from the corner of my eye as he crossed the room, with the unhurried efficiency of someone who had done this kind of thing before, arriving naturally at my father's elbow, offering a word to the couple my father was speaking with, creating the gentle gravitational pull that moved my father toward the hallway without anyone noticing the mechanism. My mother, always attuned to the sub-frequencies of a room, felt the shift and followed. The 5 of us assembled in the hallway off the kitchen, my parents, Chloe, James and me, with the party noise on one side of the door and the specific quiet of a hard conversation on the other. My mother looked at James, then at me, then at the expression on Chloe's face, which was not the expression of a woman enjoying her New Year's Eve party, and something in my mother's social armour developed a hairline fracture. "What is this?" she asked. Her voice was careful, controlled, but underneath it, the faintest tremor. "I need to tell you something about Tyler," I said. "I've needed to tell you for a while, but I wanted to be certain before I said anything. I'm certain now." My father's face shifted the habitual expression of mild disapproval he reserved for conversations about Tyler that he expected to be coming from jealousy or difficulty. "Diana." "Dad," I said, quietly, without sharpness. "Please listen to me, not as someone who thinks I'm being difficult, as someone who has spent 14 months doing their job and whose job is to find financial fraud." He stopped. "Tyler Brandt is not a real estate developer," I said. "Brandt Capital Group has completed one transaction in 8 years, a commercial property that sold at a loss. The Phoenix development does not exist in any public permit or planning record. The Nashville Meridian Park project that he announced at Christmas dinner was awarded to a different company 11 months ago. Tyler announced a contract that belongs to someone else in front of a room of people he was attempting to recruit as investors." The hallway was very quiet. "He has taken money from at least 7 investors over the past 2 years, I continued. "The amounts range from $40,000 to $280,000. None of the projects those investors funded have been completed. Several of those investors have hired attorneys. One filed a complaint with the Illinois Securities Department 14 months ago. That complaint has been under active investigation." I paused. "The investigation has escalated to a joint operation with the FBI. An arrest warrant was issued earlier today." My mother made a sound, not a word, just a small, involuntary sound, as if something had physically struck her. My father was staring at me. His face had gone through several expressions very quickly and had arrived at something I had never seen on it before. Not anger, not dismissal, not the performance of authority, something stripped and raw and frightened. "How long have you known this?" he asked. "I've been documenting it for 14 months, I said. "I brought in James 3 months ago when the investor pattern became clear and the case needed a second set of eyes and additional resources." My father looked at James. "I'm the managing director of Whitfield Advisory Group," James said. His voice was level and professional and entirely without judgment. "We specialize in forensic financial analysis and fraud risk assessment. Diana's work on this case is meticulous. The documentation is complete. The evidence is substantial." "You—" My father stopped, started again. "You've been investigating my son-in-law." "I've been doing my job," I said, "which is what I always do, which is what I've been doing for 9 years, while everyone in this family treated it as a punchline." The sentence landed. I had not planned to say it that directly, but it was out now, and I let it stand. My father absorbed it. He did not deflect it. He sat with it, and I watched it cost him something. "Robert," my mother said. Her voice was barely above a whisper. She had gone very pale. "Robert, the Hendersons." I looked at her. "Our friends, Patricia and Glenn." She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. "Tyler spoke to Glenn last month about an investment opportunity. Glenn mentioned it to me. He was excited. He said Tyler had made it sound very... She stopped. How much did Glenn invest? I asked. I don't know. He didn't give me a number. She looked at James. Is there any way can it be stopped if it hasn't transferred yet? Call Glenn tonight, James said. Tell him to contact his bank first thing tomorrow morning and halt any pending transfers to Brandt Capital Group accounts. If the transfer has already cleared, there are recovery mechanisms, but they depend on timing. Tonight is better than tomorrow. My mother nodded her hand, already moving toward her phone. Mum, I said. She looked up. Are you and Dad invested in anything Tyler has presented to you? Her face did something complicated. He suggested something last spring, a small amount. Your father thought it was a good opportunity. I looked at my father. 20,000, he said, very quietly. The words seemed to cost him something physical. He said it was seed capital for the Nashville project. He said it would triple in 18 months. I held my father's gaze. I'll need the wire transfer documentation. James's team can file an investor claim. The FBI case creates a mechanism for partial recovery in fraud situations. It won't be fast, and I can't promise the full amount, but we'll do everything we can. My father looked at me for a long moment. Diana, he said. Dad, I owe you. He stopped. The words seemed to be presenting themselves in an order he wasn't prepared for. I haven't treated your work with the seriousness it deserved. I haven't treated you... He stopped again. You don't need to do this right now, I said. I think I do, he said. There will be time, I said. Tonight there are more pressing things. He nodded. He straightened slightly, not the performed authority, but something realer and more effortful, and said, What do we do? You stay in this room with Chloe and James for 5 minutes, I said. I'm going back in there. Chloe, who had been silent through all of this, reached out and touched my arm. I looked at her. Her eyes were bright, and her jaw was set, and she looked in that moment more like herself than I had seen her look in years. I'm coming with you, she said. I looked at her for a moment. Are you sure? He lied to me, she said. Her voice was very quiet and very clear. He lied to my parents. He took money from our family and from people I've met at dinner tables, and he lied to all of us. She met my eyes. I'm coming with you. I nodded once. We went back through the door. The room was in the warm, distracted energy of the final minutes before midnight. The television showed Times Square. Someone had opened another bottle of champagne. Tyler was holding court near the fireplace, the 2 country club couples and Uncle, the surface of things, looking exactly as my mother had designed. I walked directly to him. He saw me coming. I watched his face process my expression and make rapid adjustments, defaulting to the warm, slightly condescending smile he used for me, while his eyes did the quick scan they always did, reading the room, reading Chloe at my side, reading something in my posture that didn't resolve into anything comfortable. Diana, he said, you look like a woman on a mission. I have a few questions, I said, pleasantly, conversationally, at a volume that the immediate circle could hear without the whole room turning. Diana, he laughed softly, it's New Year's Eve. I know, I said. I'll be brief. The Meridian Park development in Nashville, the one you announced at Christmas dinner. I've been looking into it. Something moved through his eyes, fast and cold. You've been looking into it, he repeated. Metro Nashville's Office of Planning and Development maintains a public database of all awarded projects, I said. I pulled the current records for the Meridian Park corridor. The lead developer on the mixed-use project you described is Lakeshore Urban Partners, a Chicago-based firm. The award was announced 11 months ago. The 2 country club couples had stopped their side conversation. Brad Coulter, from across the room, had turned slightly. The temperature in the immediate circle had changed. Tyler's expression had not broken. He was very good. But the effort was visible now, the way the effort behind a magician's smile is visible once you know what to look for. "I think you're confused about the scope of the project," he said, keeping his voice warm. "The Meridian Park corridor involves multiple parcels. Lakeshore is handling one component. Brant Capital is on a separate. The Metro Nashville records show one awarded developer for the Meridian Park mixed-use project," I said. "Lakeshore Urban Partners. The project description matches what you announced on Christmas Eve, in specific detail. $300 million mixed-use residential retail hospitality." I paused. "Word for word, Diana." His voice had dropped slightly. The warmth was still there, but underneath it, something harder. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're trying to pull tonight, but this is not the time or the place." "Tyler," I said, "I've been a forensic financial analyst for 9 years. Finding the truth in complex financial records is my profession. I've spent 14 months reviewing Brant Capital Group's public filings, lien records, and transaction history. I've spoken with 7 investors who gave you money for projects that don't exist. I've reviewed the wire transfer documentation from 4 of those investors, which I obtained through their attorneys." I let that settle for exactly 1 second. "I'm not pulling a stunt. I'm doing my job." The room had gone quiet. Not all of it. The television was still going. Someone near the drinks cart was still laughing at something, but the cluster of people around us had gone very still. Tyler looked at me. The performance had cracked. Underneath it was something I recognized from deposition rooms, the expression of a man calculating his options in real time, cycling through narratives, looking for the one that could still work. He found one. I had expected him to. "Everyone," he said, raising his voice to the room, with the practiced ease of a man who had always commanded spaces. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party, but I think we need to address something." He turned to face the larger group, his posture shifting from defensive to aggrieved. The pivot from suspect to victim performed with the fluency of long practice. "My sister-in-law has apparently spent the last year conducting an unauthorized investigation into my business, and she's chosen New Year's Eve to ambush me with allegations in front of our family and friends." He looked at the room with an expression of wounded dignity. "I've tried to be patient with Diana. I've tried to understand that she has her own complicated relationship with success and with this family, but this has gone too far." He turned back to me, his voice dropping to a tone of controlled, injured authority. "You have a problem with me. You've always had a problem with me. And I think everyone in this room who has watched you spend the last 2 years picking apart everything I say and do can see what this is really about." He let the implication hang. I had anticipated this too. "What is it about?" I asked. "Jealousy," he said simply. "You're alone, Diana. You've been alone for years. Your sister has a marriage and a life and a future, and you have a job that you've turned into an obsession because you don't have anything else. And when you couldn't find anything real to criticize, you manufactured something." The room was very quiet. My mother, who had come back through the door behind me, was standing near the entryway. My father was beside her. Their faces were not what Tyler expected, not the customary parental disapproval directed at the difficult daughter. They were something else entirely. "Manufactured," I repeated. I kept my voice perfectly even. "Tyler, I have a documentation package. It includes Brant Capital Group's public filings, the UCC lien records showing 11 active liens on business assets, the Metro Nashville planning database records, and written statements from 7 investors. The package was reviewed by my firm and has been submitted to the Illinois Securities Department as supplementary evidence in their active investigation." I reached into my bag and withdrew a slim folder. "This is a summary document, 4 pages. It includes the key findings and the source references for each claim. I placed it on the coffee table between us. Nobody moved toward it immediately, but everyone was looking at it. "You submitted evidence to the securities department," Tyler said. His voice was very controlled now. The wounded dignity had receded. Underneath it was something colder. 14 months ago, an investor filed a complaint about Brandt Capital Group, I said. The investigation that followed became a joint operation with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. I have been in contact with the lead investigator for 3 months. I paused. An arrest warrant was issued earlier today. The word warrant changed the room. Not dramatically, not the way it happens in movies, with gasps and immediate chaos. It changed it the way rooms change when something real is said. A slight collective stillness, a reorganization of attention, the specific quality of people processing information that is larger than the social occasion they are standing in. Brad Coulter set down his champagne glass. Tyler's eyes went to Brad, fast and sharp. "Brad," he said, and his voice had changed the warmth, entirely gone, now replaced by something clipped and calculating. "Whatever she's told you." "Tyler," Brad said. His voice was quiet and entirely professional. "I think we should stop here." Tyler stared at him. "What?" "I think you should stop talking," Brad said. He reached into his jacket pocket and withdrew a card, which he placed on the coffee table next to my folder. "That's the number for the attorney the FBI Victims Unit has been working with. I strongly recommend you call that number before you say anything else tonight." The room processed this. Wendy Coulter had moved slightly away from her husband, not dramatically, but the physical distance was visible and deliberate. Tyler looked at the card on the coffee table. He looked at my folder beside it. He looked at Brad Coulter with the expression of a man who has just understood something he cannot ununderstand. He started. "I'm not going to discuss my role tonight," Brad said. "I'm going to suggest one more time that you call that attorney." The television behind us counted down. 10, 9, 8. The party that my mother had spent 3 months designing continued its final seconds with the cheerful indifference of scheduled events. Tyler turned to my father. I watched him do it, the pivot, to the one person in the room. He had always been able to rely on the man who had vouched for him at the car dealership and co-signed his reputation at every dinner party, and looked at him with the adoration of a man who had found the son he wanted. "Robert," Tyler said. His voice was very different now. The performance had finally fallen away completely, and what was underneath it was not confidence or authority. It was a kind of desperation that was almost unrecognizable on his face, as if a mask had been removed to reveal a different mask, and then that one too. "Robert, you know me. You know what I've built. This is a misunderstanding. She's always had a problem with our marriage, with Chloe's success, with—" "Tyler," my father said. The countdown reached 0. The room erupted briefly in the automatic celebration of midnight voices, rising glasses, touching the television, showing fireworks over Manhattan. It lasted approximately 30 seconds, and then the people near us remembered where they were, and the noise subsided. "Tyler," my father said again, into the quiet that followed. "My daughter invested 14 months in this. She documented it. She protected us." He paused, and I watched the words cost him. "I invested $20,000 in your Nashville project. I did it because I trusted you, because I wanted to." He looked at Tyler steadily. "I should have asked Diana first." The sentence was so simple and so devastating that for a moment nobody said anything. Tyler's face did something that was not quite a collapse, but was the precursor to the expression of a man whose central narrative has just been removed and who has not yet located the replacement. He looked at Chloe. Chloe was standing 3 feet away from him. She had her arms folded across her chest, Not in the performative way she sometimes crossed her arms, but in the genuine way of someone holding themselves together. "Chloe," Tyler said. His voice had gone soft in a way I hadn't heard from him before, not the manufactured warmth, but something that might have been real. "Babe, listen, let's go somewhere and talk, just us. I can explain." "How many investors?" Chloe asked. He blinked. "What?" Diana said 7 investors. "How many people gave you money for projects that don't exist?" "Chloe, it's not the projects are real, they're just delayed. The capital markets have been." "How many people?" she said again. He looked at her, at the set of her jaw and the steadiness in her eyes, and he understood that the version of Chloe who had been available to this performance, the one who had needed to believe, who had chosen not to look too closely, who had told herself that her questions were paranoia, was no longer present. He didn't answer. "The necklace," she said. She raised her hand to her collarbone, where the jewellery he had given her at Christmas sat against her skin. Her fingers found the clasp. "You gave me this for Christmas. Where did the money come from?" Silence. She unclasped it. She held it for a moment in her palm, looking at it. Then she walked to the coffee table and set it down next to my folder and Brad Coulter's card. The room watched. "I need some air," she said. She walked past Tyler, past my parents, past the country club couples, standing very still with their champagne glasses, and went through the sliding door to the back porch. I followed her. The back porch was cold and dark and quiet. The New Year noise from the neighbourhood, a distant ambient hum. Chloe was standing at the railing, looking out at the frozen backyard, her breath visible in the cold air, her bare arms wrapped around herself. I took off my jacket and put it around her shoulders. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she let out a long, slow breath that turned to mist. "I knew," she said. "Chloe." "Not specifically, not the details." She shook her head slightly. "But I knew something was wrong. There were things that didn't add up. The bank statements, I used to see them when we were first married, and then he started managing all of it separately. He said it was easier. He said I didn't need to worry about it." She paused. "I let him tell me that." "People do," I said, "when they love someone, when the alternative is too complicated to face." "He picked me because I wouldn't ask questions," she said, and the clarity of it, the flat, unsparing clarity, was something I had not heard in her voice before. "That's why he married me. Not because he loved me, because I was convenient, because I had a family that would vouch for him and a temperament that wouldn't investigate." I didn't disagree with her. There was no kindness in disagreeing. "You were also 30 years old, and someone told you they loved you," I said. "That's not a character flaw. That's being human." She was quiet for a while. "Your husband?" she said. "James?" "Yes." "He runs a company?" "Yes." Are you happy? With him?" The question was so unexpected that for a moment I didn't answer. Then I said, "Yes, very." "Why didn't you tell us?" "Because I wanted to wait until there was something real to say," I said. "Until I could stand in front of this family and say, this is my life, this is what I've built, this is who I am, without it being absorbed into whatever narrative was already running." I paused. I needed this family to see me before they saw him. If James had walked through that door 2 years ago, everything would have been about what he has, not about what I am. She turned to look at me. "And what are you?" "I'm very good at my job," I said. "I'm careful, and I'm thorough, and I care deeply about the truth. I have built a career and a partnership and a marriage out of those things, without anyone in this family paying the slightest attention." I held her gaze. "And tonight, that finally matters. Not because I needed it to, because you needed it to." She was quiet again. "What happens now?" she said. "To Tyler. To me. My name is on things. The house, the car. Your name is on the residential lease for the house you share," I said. The vehicle is registered to Brandt Capital Group. I've reviewed both. You're not exposed on the business fraud because you have no ownership stake in Brandt Capital Group and your name doesn't appear on any of the investment agreements or the fraudulent filings. I paused. I checked before I said anything tonight because I wanted to be certain before I took this apart. She looked at me. You protected me. You're my sister, I said. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright, and she was blinking rapidly in the way of someone managing something large. I'm sorry, she said, for Christmas, for all the dinners for the things I've said about you, about your apartment and your job and being alone. I've been an awful sister for a very long time. You've been performing the role you were cast in, I said, same as I was. That's very generous. It's accurate, I said. We were both responding to the same family dynamic. You were the golden child, and I was the disappointment, and neither of us chose those roles. I looked at her. What we do from here is the part that's actually a choice. She nodded. She pulled my jacket tighter around her shoulders. Can we stay out here for one more minute? She asked. As long as you want, I said. We stood together in the cold dark, while the new year settled around us. When we went back inside, the room had reorganized itself. The country club couples had collected their coats and said their careful, diplomatic goodbyes. Brad and Wendy Coulter had also gone. Brad, pausing briefly at the door to exchange a look with James that contained several sentences of professional communication compressed into 2 seconds. The extended family had retreated to the far end of the living room, the cousins on their phones, Aunt Patricia sitting with Uncle Glenn and watching the main room with the alert, concerned attention of people who were not sure if they should leave. Tyler was sitting on the sofa. This was the detail that surprised me, that he was sitting. The Tyler Brandt I had observed for 2 years never sat in submissive postures. He occupied chairs with the expansive ease of ownership. He stood when he had something to announce. He moved through rooms with the confident forward momentum of a man who understood that physical presence was a form of authority. He was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his head slightly forward, and he looked like a man who had run out of options and was in the process of understanding what that meant. My father was in the armchair across from him, also sitting, not with anger. The anger had not arrived yet, or if it had, it was somewhere beneath the surface, submerged under something more complicated. He looked like a man taking inventory of a very large room and finding that several things he had believed were in it were not there. James was standing near the fireplace. He had the folder open and was speaking quietly with my father. When he saw me come back through the door, he looked up, and the brief private communication of 2 years of partnership passed between us. Are you all right? Yes. How is she? She'll be okay. Good. My mother came to me first. She took both my hands in hers and held them, and she looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before, stripped of the social manager's careful control, of the habitual mild disappointment, of the performance of everything. Just Caroline Mercer, 61 years old, looking at her older daughter. I am sorry, she said. Her voice was quiet and entirely direct. I am sorry that I didn't listen to you. I'm sorry that we made you feel like your work wasn't serious or important. I'm sorry for a great deal, Diana. More than I can say tonight. She pressed my hands. But I want to start saying it. I looked at her, at the pearl earrings and the silver dress, and the expression of someone who has taken her social armour off and is standing in a room without it for the first time in a long time. Okay, I said, simply, without qualifying it or hedging it or offering a disclaimer about how much work remained. Just okay. She nodded. She released my hands and straightened, and I watched the competence return to her posture. Not the performance of it, but the real thing, the genuine, Organisational intelligence she had always had and had always directed toward appearances rather than substance. "What do we need to do?" she asked. "James is going to walk you and Dad through the documentation tonight," I said. "There are steps to take before the business week starts. Glenn's investment, your father's investment, some financial separation items that should happen before the arrest is executed." I paused. "There are also some conversations to have with your attorney about the house. Your names are on the cosign for Tyler's residential lease. That needs to be addressed quickly." My mother nodded, absorbing this with the efficiency of a woman who had always been excellent at executing plans once someone handed her a clear one. "I'll call our attorney tonight. He owes me a favour." She looked at James. "Can you brief him on the specifics?" "Of course," James said. "Good." She looked at Tyler on the sofa. Her expression, as it passed over him, was something I could not fully decode, a complicated archaeology of 2 years of adoration and tonight's revelation, and somewhere underneath it all, the specific grief of a mother whose daughter had been betrayed. "Chloe," standing beside me, looked at our mother. "You're staying here tonight?" my mother said. It was not a question. Chloe nodded. At 12:45, Tyler stood up. He had been sitting on the sofa for 40 minutes. Nobody had spoken to him directly. He was not handcuffed or restrained. The arrest warrant was still in the process of execution. The federal agents en route to this address, as backup to whatever location Tyler went to next. He was technically free to move. He was also, as he had been, for the past hour, a man who understood that the walls of his constructed world had come down, and that movement in any direction led to the same destination. He stood up and straightened his cashmere blazer with the habitual gesture of someone reassembling an appearance, and he looked around the room. My father looked back at him, not with hatred, with something quieter and more final. "I need to make a phone call," Tyler said, "and then I need to leave." Nobody stopped him. He walked toward the hallway. At the edge of the living room, he paused and turned back, and he looked at Chloe with an expression that I watched very carefully, trying to determine if it was genuine or performed, if there was any real feeling underneath the calculation, or if I was anthropomorphizing the reflexes of a practiced manipulator. I couldn't tell. Perhaps that was the point. Perhaps he had been performing for so long that even he could no longer locate the line. "I'm sorry," he said to Chloe. Just that. She looked at him. She didn't say anything. He went to make his phone call. 20 minutes later, he left the house. The dark BMW pulled out of the driveway, turned right on my parents' street, and disappeared into the new year. At 2:14 in the morning, Andrew Finch sent me a text. "Subject in custody. Executed without incident at 1:58 a.m. at subject's secondary address. Thank you for everything, Diana." This one was clean. I showed the message to James. He read it, nodded once, and put his arm around me. We were sitting on the porch swing at the back of my parents' house, cold enough that we had borrowed blankets from the linen closet, warm enough with the blankets and the proximity that it was manageable. Inside, through the sliding glass door, I could see the low light of the living room where my parents were still up, the folders open on the coffee table, talking to each other quietly. The party debris, the champagne glasses and the silver decorations, and the centrepiece my mother had arranged with her usual precision, surrounded them, and they sat in the middle of it, looking like two people getting to know each other again. "Your father's going to be all right," James said. "I know," I said. "He's tougher than he knows. He's just never been required to be. And your mother." I thought about my mother's hands holding mine, the stripped expression. I want to start saying it. "She's going to be more than all right," I said. "She's been managing everyone else for 30 years. When she turns that intelligence towards something real, she's going to be formidable." James made a sound of agreement. "Chloe," he asked. I looked through the window. Chloe was in the kitchen, visible through the pass-through, making tea. She moved with a kind of careful, deliberate attention to the small task, filling the kettle, selecting the mugs that I recognised as what people do when they need to be inside their own bodies for a while, when they need the physical reality of a simple action to anchor them while the larger world rearranges itself. "She's going to have a hard few months," I said. The divorce, the public dimension of the case, learning to live without the structure that she organised her whole identity around. I paused. "But I think she's going to find out she's more capable than she knows. I think that's the thing Tyler didn't bank on. He chose her because she seemed unlikely to look too closely. What he missed was that people who haven't been required to look closely are not the same as people who are incapable of it." James was quiet for a moment. Then, "That's true of a lot of things." "Yes," I said, "it is." We sat in the cold and the quiet of the new year. "James," I said. "I want to bring you to things," I said. "Family things. Not because I need you there as a credential or a shield, but because this is my family imperfect as it is, and you are my life, and those two things shouldn't be kept in separate boxes anymore." He turned to look at me. "Are you sure you want that?" "Yes," I said. "They're going to be different now. Not perfect, not fixed in an evening, but different, and I want to be present for that. I want to be in the room for the hard, incremental, unglamorous work of actually repairing something." I paused. "Which is, as it turns out, something I'm reasonably good at." He smiled. "You are extraordinary at it." "Don't tell my sister," I said. "She'll want to hire you." He laughed a real laugh, quiet and warm in the cold air, and I leaned against him and looked up at the winter sky and felt the specific, unremarkable, extraordinary sensation of being exactly where I was supposed to be. The weeks that followed were not a clean narrative. Real endings rarely are. Real endings are paperwork and phone calls, and the grinding procedural work of dismantling something complicated that had been constructed over years. They are conversations that circle back on themselves, and feelings that arrive on unexpected schedules, and mornings when the thing you thought you had resolved turns out to need another layer of resolution. Tyler Brandt was arraigned on January 4th. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, and misappropriation of investor funds. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. Bail was set at $400,000. His parents, who lived in Ohio, and whom I had never met, provided a fraction of it, and Tyler was released on electronic monitoring pending trial. The trial, James told me, would likely take 18 months to reach. The federal docket was crowded. The case was strong. His legal team would almost certainly advise a plea agreement at some point, which would resolve things faster, but with less public accountability. These were the trade-offs of the judicial process, and I had made my peace with them years ago. The truth did not require a dramatic public execution to be true. Chloe filed for divorce in January. She did it with a quiet, methodical efficiency that surprised everyone who had spent years watching her prioritize beauty over substance. She hired a good attorney, not the most expensive one, the most competent one, which was a distinction she had learned to make, and she worked through the process with the focused attention of someone who had discovered in the wreckage of her marriage that she was more capable than she had been given reason to believe. She moved into an apartment in the city in February. It was smaller than the house she had shared with Tyler and larger than the space my family had allowed her to inhabit in their imagination of her. She got a job, a real one, not the kind she had held for 8 months at a time, before drifting away at a non-profit arts organisation where her social fluency and her eye for presentation turned out to be genuinely useful. She called me on a Tuesday evening in March to tell me she had been given more responsibility and a small raise and her voice, when she said it had a quality I had not heard in it before, the specific, unperformed pleasure of having done something on her own. My parents worked through their share of the fallout with the methodical competence my mother had always possessed, and my father had always been capable of, when he permitted himself to set aside the performance of effortless authority. They consulted their attorney. They filed an investor claim. They had the difficult conversation with Glenn Henderson, who had not yet transferred funds to Tyler. My mother's New Year's Eve call had arrived in time, and who received the news about Tyler with the stunned, shaken quality of a man who understood how close he had come. My father called me in mid-January, not to discuss the case or the documentation or the steps James's firm was taking to assist with the investor claims. He called to ask if I wanted to get lunch. We met at a restaurant in the city, a small Italian place near my office that I had been going to for years. He arrived first and was already seated when I came in, which was not how our interactions had historically been arranged. He stood when he saw me, and there was something in the gesture, the old-fashioned courtliness of it, the effort behind it, that I filed carefully. We ate pasta and talked, not about Tyler, mostly about my work, in the specific and curious way of someone who was genuinely trying to understand rather than politely acknowledging a subject. He asked how forensic financial analysis worked. He asked about the cases I had testified in. He asked about James, and I told him, and he listened with a focused attention that was not the attention of a man performing interest, but of a man actually having it. Halfway through the meal, he said without preamble, "I've been thinking about what you said, about treating your work like a punchline." "Dad." "Let me finish," he said. "I've been thinking about why I did that, and I think the honest answer is that your success made me feel small in a way that Tyler's did not. Tyler talked about money in ways I recognized the big deals, the important meetings, the language of it. I understood the vocabulary, even if I couldn't verify the substance. Your work was different. It was technical and precise, and you never explained it to us in ways we could easily grasp, and I think I told myself that meant it wasn't as real as the things I could understand." He paused. "That was wrong. I was wrong, and I want to say it clearly, not as a prelude to something else, just as a fact." I looked at my father, at his silver hair and his golf club posture, and the expression on his face that was the most unguarded I had ever seen it. "Thank you," I said. "I'd like to understand your work better," he said, "if you're willing to explain it." "I am," I said. We stayed for 2 hours, and I talked about my work, the actual work, the methodology, and the texture of it, the cases that had been difficult and the moments that had been satisfying, and my father listened and asked questions, and occasionally said something perceptive that surprised me, because intelligence had always been part of what he was, and he had simply been directing it at the wrong things. It was not reconciliation, it was a beginning, but beginnings, I had learned, were not small things. James and I went to a family Easter dinner in April. It was at my parents' house, smaller than Christmas, just immediate family, and the aunt and uncle, and my cousin Marcus, who was in his final year of law school, and who spent the meal asking James careful, interested questions about forensic finance as a field. My mother had cooked the whole meal herself, rather than hiring a caterer, which was a choice she mentioned only once and in passing, but which I understood as something deliberate. The dinner was not transformed. It was not the radiant chosen family gathering at the end of a redemption story. It was an ordinary, slightly awkward, genuinely human family meal, with a few strained silences and a few easy ones and a few moments of real laughter, and my father telling the 2019 commercial property story again, and James sitting next to me, briefly pressing his knee against mine under the table, in the private language of two people who find the same things funny. After dinner, while James helped my father clean up, My father had not offered to do this before, and James had simply begun doing it, and somehow that created a situation where my father was also doing it. My mother and Chloe and I sat on the back porch with glasses of wine. The yard was green and cool in the April evening. A cardinal was doing something purposeful in the hedge at the far end of the garden. Tyler's attorney approached mine about a plea agreement, Chloe said, not with drama, just as a fact, something to be mentioned. What kind? I asked. Reduced charges in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. His attorney apparently thinks the federal evidence is too strong to go to trial. She swirled her wine. My attorney thinks I should be prepared for him to testify about our marriage in ways that are unflattering to me. To you, my mother said. To my credulity, Chloe said. The word was chosen carefully. He'll probably argue that his lifestyle was a shared project, that I was aware of the general situation and chose not to ask questions. Were you? I asked. She was quiet for a moment. I had questions I chose not to pursue, she said. That's different from being aware of specifics. My attorney says the distinction matters legally. Personally, she paused. Personally, I've been trying to understand what I was choosing not to know and why, and I think the honest answer is that I chose a comfortable story over an uncomfortable truth, because the comfortable story was very good, and I was young, and I wanted it to be real. She looked at me. You saw what I didn't. I've been thinking about that a lot. I was trained to see it, I said. You weren't. That's not a moral failure, Chloe. It's an asymmetry of information and skill. You're being generous again. I'm being accurate, I said. Again. She smiled. It was a real smile, not the performed version, not the social instrument. Just a smile. My mother reached out and refilled both their glasses and mine without being asked, and we sat on the porch in the April evening, watching the cardinal do its purposeful thing in the hedge, and nobody performed anything, and it was imperfect and genuine and more than good enough. 6 months later, James and I drove up to Wisconsin for a long weekend. We had rented a cabin on a lake north of Madison, not glamorous, nothing like the corporate retreats and luxury properties that had populated my professional world. A simple wooden structure with a dock and a fire pit and the particular quiet of a place that is far enough from everything that the noise of your own life has room to settle. We had been talking in the careful, incremental way we discussed large things about what came next. Not next week or next month, next in the larger sense. The firm was growing. James had been approached about expanding into a new city. I had been offered a position on a federal advisory panel for financial crime prevention. These were good problems, the kind that require actual decisions rather than just endurance. We were also, with the same careful incrementalism, talking about a family. Not urgently, we were 34 and 42, and there was time, but honestly, the way we tried to talk about everything. On the second evening, I was sitting on the dock at the end of the day, my feet over the water, watching the light change on the lake. The evening was warm, and the lake was still, and the sky had the specific quality of late summer, in the upper Midwest, wide and clear and faintly melancholy, in the way of all things ending. James came and sat beside me and handed me a glass of something cold. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "The cabin," I said. He waited. "There was a family in my parents' neighbourhood when I was growing up," I said. "The Harrises. They had a cabin on a lake somewhere in Minnesota. Every summer they'd pack their station wagon with coolers and sleeping bags, and they'd be gone for 2 weeks. When they came back, the kids were brown and tired and happy in the specific way of people who have been somewhere real." I paused. I wanted that. When I was 8 or 9, I wanted a family that went somewhere real. "We're somewhere real," James said. "I know," I said. "I know." The light was going gold on the water. "My family is different now," I said. "Not fixed, not what I would have designed, but different. My father calls me to talk about cases. My mother has started coming to the city for lunch. Chloe texts me things she finds funny, which is new. I paused. It's not the family I wanted at 8 years old, but it's the actual family I have doing the actual work of being something real. And I think that matters more than the fantasy version. It does, James said. And then there's you, I said. And then there's me, he agreed. I leaned against him. The lake held the last of the light. Somewhere across the water, a loon called that specific ancient sound, and then was quiet. I think I'm finally home, I said. He put his arm around me. You've been building toward it for a long time. Yes, I said. I have. We sat on the dock until the light was gone. Then we went inside and lit the fire and cooked something simple and talked until late, the way we always did about work and cases and books and small observations about the world, and the evening was uncomplicated and warm and entirely our own. There is a version of this story that ends with Tyler Brandt in a federal courtroom, the gavel coming down justice, arriving in its most visible and public form. There is a version where my family assembles around a table, and everything is healed, and the past is repaired, and the people who failed me recognize it fully and say so in exactly the right words. I have worked in financial forensics for 9 years. I know that the neatest version of a story is rarely the truest one. What actually happened was this. Tyler entered a plea agreement in February of the following year. He pled guilty to 2 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of securities fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence and full cooperation with the FBI's ongoing investigation into the private lenders who had enabled his schemes. He was sentenced to 4 years in a federal facility and ordered to pay restitution to all identified investors, which included my father's $20,000. The restitution would take years and would likely never be fully recovered. This was the actual justice system operating at its actual pace, which was slow and partial and real. Chloe's divorce was finalized in March. She kept nothing from the marriage that Tyler had provided, not because she was required to surrender it, but because she chose to, with the specific deliberateness of someone drawing a clean line. She kept what she had come in with, which included a talent for creating beautiful things and a social intelligence she had always had and was only now learning to direct purposefully. She took a course in interior design in the fall and discovered, at 31, that she had genuine aptitude for a field that combined her eye for beauty with an actual professional structure. It would take time, several years, not a television montage, and it would be hard in the specific, unglamorous way that building something real always is. But she was doing it, and the quality of her voice when she talked about it was different from any voice I had heard from her before. My parents sold the Naperville house in the spring. Not because they had to. The cosign on Tyler's lease was resolved without lasting liability, but because they chose to. The house had become, in my mother's words, a set. They moved to a smaller place in a different suburb, with a garden my mother had always wanted, and a study my father was filling with the books he had meant to read for 30 years. They were, at 61 and 64 respectively, learning who they were outside the performance of the life they had spent decades maintaining. This was not a clean or comfortable process. It was the kind of late middle-age reckoning that comes to people who have organised their identities around external scaffolding and then have the scaffolding removed. It was hard. They were hard on each other sometimes. They called me and asked hard questions, and I answered them as honestly as I could. James and I went to their house for dinner once a month. Not every month was easy. Some were awkward in the specific way of people who are still learning the vocabulary of an honest relationship after years of a managed one. But we kept going, and the dinners became over time something I looked forward to rather than endured. My father and I talked about finance at those dinners, not always, sometimes about other things, but often. He had, it turned out, a genuine interest in how markets worked and how fraud operated and why intelligent people were susceptible to certain kinds of deception. He asked good questions. He read the articles I sent him. He called me one evening to tell me he had watched a documentary about the Theranos case and had wanted to talk through the mechanics of how it had persisted as long as it did. I stayed on the phone with him for an hour and a half. My mother, for her part, redirected the organisational intelligence she had spent 30 years investing in social performance toward a financial literacy non-profit she helped found with 2 women from her garden club. She was extraordinarily good at it. She had, as I had told James, she would become formidable. As for me, the Federal Advisory Panel appointment came through in the fall. The work was different from client cases, more policy-oriented, more focused on systemic prevention than individual prosecution, and it required me to think about fraud, not as a series of discrete events, but as a structural phenomenon, something that emerges from gaps in institutional transparency and cultures of willful non-looking. I found it deeply interesting. I wrote a paper about it that was published in a policy journal and cited more times than I expected. James and I had dinner with Brad and Wendy Coulter in November. Brad had wrapped his role in the Brandt investigation, and we were for the first time able to speak freely about it. He was thoughtful and funny, and Wendy was direct in the specific way I liked, and we stayed late at the restaurant, talking about things that were not the case at all, about cities we had lived in, and books we were reading, and the specific pleasures of work done carefully. On the drive home, James said, "I like them." "I know," I said. "I could tell. We should do it again." "We should," I said. This was the life I had built. Not a triumph or a resolution, not the fireworks and standing ovation ending that the revenge fantasy version of this story would require. Just a life, genuine and demanding and full of actual people, doing the actual work of actual relationships, which is the only work that matters, and which never fully resolves, and which is, in my considered opinion, more than enough. I want to say one thing before I finish, something I have thought about more than once in the year since the New Year's Eve party that changed the shape of my family. I did not investigate Tyler Brandt to hurt him, or to prove something to my family, or to make myself feel powerful at someone else's expense. I investigated Tyler Brandt because I was trained to recognise financial fraud, and I recognised it, and because the investors who were losing their savings deserved someone to do something about it, and because my sister and my parents were standing adjacent to a federal crime with no knowledge that the ground was unstable. The fact that this work also happened to dismantle the narrative my family had used to diminish me, to make my expertise a punchline, and my seriousness a character flaw, and my independence a form of failure, was a consequence, not a motive. I want to be clear about this, because the alternative is a story where I am the protagonist of my own revenge, where the point is the satisfaction of watching people who underestimated me recognise their error. And I understand why that story is appealing. I understand why it gets told. There is something genuinely compelling about the moment when the person who was dismissed is revealed to have been extraordinary all along. But that story does something dangerous. It locates worth in the recognition of others. It says that what makes you valuable is the moment when the people who doubted you finally see it. And if you believe that, then you are still organising your life around their gaze, just from the winning end of it. My worth was never in Tyler Brandt's exposure. It was never in my father's changed expression, or my mother's apology, or the specific satisfaction of being right in front of people who thought I was wrong. My worth was in the 14 months of methodical work, in the careful documentation, in the phone calls with investors' attorneys, and the hours with financial databases, and the late nights cross-referencing records, until the picture was complete and the case could hold its own weight. In the quality of the work itself done carefully, because it was worth doing. That was always there. It was there before anyone in my family knew about it. It was there when my sister was describing my apartment as the sum total of a failed life. It was there when Tyler Brandt was receiving my father's reverential attention, and I was sitting across the table being told I needed to smile more. The recognition was not the thing. The recognition was just what happened when the thing met the light. I think about this sometimes when I'm at my desk early in the morning, before the day has assembled itself into its demands, when it's just me and the work and the particular quality of morning light. Through the window of the office James and I share on the 14th floor of a building in the city. I think about the 26-year-old version of me who went to her first forensic audit and understood for the first time that she was exactly where she was supposed to be, that the mind she had been told was too careful, too technical, too interested in the footnotes was not a limitation but a gift. She didn't need her family to believe that to make it true. She needed to believe it herself. She did.